The U.S. Department of Energy studied it. MIT's materials lab confirmed it works. And yet, right now, millions of American homeowners are paying hundreds of dollars every year, sometimes thousands, to solve a problem that a $3 bag of powder can handle. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's an economic pattern. The dehumidifier and HVAC industry in America is worth over $15 billion a year. And buried inside that number is a simple truth: nobody in that industry wants trending on your feed. Passive desiccant powder absorbs moisture from the air for weeks, requires zero electricity, and costs less than a fast food meal. Here's the strange part. This isn't new technology. It's been used since World War II. If you want to understand why affordable solutions disappear while expensive ones dominate your utility bill, subscribe right now. Because this story about a $3 powder is actually a window into one of the most repeated economic patterns in modern America. This isn't really a story about powder. It's about how billion-dollar industries use building codes, lobbying, and insurance frameworks to make sure the cheap option never becomes the default option. The question was never whether desiccants work. That's settled science. The real question is who benefits every single month that you don't know about them. The answer connects HVAC lobbying, state regulatory capture, and an insurance industry that only profits when problems happen, not when they're prevented. Today, we're breaking down the science, the suppression history, and the full economic machinery behind why a $3 solution remains on the margins, while Americans hemorrhage money on electric alternatives. By the end, you won't just know what this powder does. You'll understand exactly why the system works against it, and precisely who collects the money every time it does. Let's get into it. Soldiers in World War II relied on desiccant packets to keep ammunition, instruments, and electronics dry during overseas shipment. This was the 1940s. The technology predates your grandfather's first mortgage. In 2004, researchers at Oak Ridge National Laboratory confirmed that passive moisture absorption in residential spaces could significantly reduce the load placed on mechanical HVAC systems, cutting energy use without cutting performance. Meanwhile, the U.S. HVAC market now generates over $15.8 billion every year. The global dehumidifier market alone is projected to hit $4.5 billion by 2027, and yet fewer than 2% of American homes use passive desiccant control as a primary humidity solution. That gap between what works and what gets adopted is exactly what this channel was built to examine. What the powder actually does. One independent materials study found that calcium chloride desiccant outperformed electric dehumidifiers in low-traffic enclosed spaces at roughly 1/200th of the operating cost. 1/200th. The industry barely mentioned it. Picture a basement in Cleveland. It's August. The walls sweat. A homeowner has a $300 electric dehumidifier running around the clock, humming, pulling power, generating a monthly electricity cost the family just absorbs as a fact of life, like rent or groceries. They've never been told another option exists, not by their contractor, not by their home inspector, not by their insurance provider. Here's the economic reality most people never see. A mid-size electric dehumidifier costs between $0.15 and $0.30 per hour to operate. Run it 8 hours a day and you're spending $35 to $70 every single month just on electricity, before maintenance, before replacement parts, before the unit eventually dies and you buy another one. Calcium chloride desiccant packs, $2 to $4 per month for the same enclosed space. Annual savings per household range from $200 to $600 depending on usage. Multiply that across the 40 million American homes with basement humidity issues, and you are looking at a collective $8 to $24 billion sitting on the table. Money that currently flows to utility companies and appliance manufacturers instead of staying in household budgets. You've probably paid hundreds in electricity bills fighting a problem this powder could manage for the price of a cup of coffee every month, for years. The barrier here is not technology, the powder works. The barrier is the economic architecture built around making sure you reach for the expensive option first and never seriously consider the cheap one. Would you switch if it saved you $400 a year? Most people say yes. Most people have never been given the chance. The banned states question. At least 11 states have building codes or environmental statutes written broadly enough to restrict, discourage, or functionally prohibit the use of bulk desiccant materials as part of residential moisture management systems. 11. And in most cases, the homeowner never finds out until an inspector flags it. Picture a contractor in Sacramento. He's worked residential construction for 19 years. A client asks him to install a passive desiccant system in a crawl space, something he researched himself, something that's been proven to work. The contractor has to tell him no, not because it doesn't work, because the California Building Code, written with input from HVAC industry working groups, doesn't recognize it as a compliant solution. The client ends up installing a $4,200 mechanical ventilation system instead. The economics of why this happens are not subtle once you see them. HVAC contractors across the United States generate over $130 billion in annual revenue. That number depends on recurring service calls, equipment replacement cycles, and new installations. A passive desiccant solution threatens all three revenue lines simultaneously. It requires no service call. It has no moving parts to replace, and it costs $3. The average HVAC service call runs between $150 and $500. A maintenance contract on a residential system runs $200 to $600 per year. Now multiply that by tens of millions of households, and you begin to understand what's financially at stake every time a cheap alternative gains traction. A landlord in Austin documented saving $200 annually using desiccant materials across several storage and utility spaces in a rental complex, until his property insurance provider flagged the deviation from standard equipment norms. Regulations follow money, not always science, and in the space between science and regulation, billions of dollars change hands every year. Should building codes be written by industry working groups or by independent scientists with no financial stake in the outcome? The lobbying machine. The Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, AHRI, spent over $4.2 million on federal lobbying activity between 2018 and 2023. That figure doesn't include state-level expenditure, PAC contributions, or the quieter work done through affiliated trade associations that never show up in a single line-item disclosure. Picture a conference room in Washington. Not dramatic. No villains in the Hollywood sense. Just industry representatives presenting what they call safety and performance standards to a subcommittee. Standards that happen to require certified mechanical equipment, licensed installation, and periodic professional servicing. Standards that have no pathway for a passive, uncertified $3 alternative to meet compliance. The outcome looks like consumer protection. It functions like market protection. The cost math drives everything. A residential HVAC installation averages between $5,000 and $12,000 depending on system size and regional labor rates. On top of that, the maintenance contract. On top of that, the utility cost. On top of that, eventual replacement, because no mechanical system lasts forever. The financial model requires complexity. Simplicity is the threat. Lobbying doesn't always work by banning things directly. That would be too visible. The more effective method is procedural. Make the cheap option impossible to certify. Make the certification process expensive and industry-controlled. Make non-compliance a liability risk. Suddenly, the $3 solution isn't illegal. It's just practically unusable in any formal construction or renovation context. Every time a cheap solution gets coded out of existence, a more expensive one gets coded in. That's not corruption in the dramatic sense. It's just how regulatory capture works when the industry being regulated also writes the standards. Is this consumer regulation, or is it market protection wearing a regulatory uniform? The environmental argument used against it. Here is the argument that gets deployed most effectively against desiccant adoption at scale. Calcium chloride is a chloride compound. Chloride compounds can affect groundwater and soil chemistry near drainage points. Therefore, residential desiccant use poses an environmental risk. It sounds reasonable. It is also deeply selective in its application. Picture a highway maintenance crew in Minnesota. It's February. They're spreading calcium chloride by the ton across 40 miles of interstate, Standard procedure in 30 states, approved, funded, legally mandated in many jurisdictions for road safety. Nobody flags an environmental conflict. Nobody pulls the permit. Now picture a homeowner in New Jersey who bought a 12-pound bucket of calcium chloride desiccant for his crawl space. Under certain state environmental code interpretations, the improper disposal of that bucket's residue, not even its use, its disposal, can create a technical compliance issue. The same chemical, a fraction of the volume, residential scale. The water damage restoration industry in the United States generates over $12 billion annually. That industry exists because humidity and moisture problems in American homes remain unsolved at the prevention level. Prevention collapses restoration demand. A cheap, effective preventive solution is therefore not just commercially inconvenient for the HVAC sector. It threatens an entirely separate multi-billion-dollar remediation economy built downstream of the same unresolved problem. Environmental law is one of the most powerful and legitimate tools in modern governance. It is also one of the most available tools for incumbent industries to deploy against disruptive alternatives, not always through fraud, but through selective application, broad statutory language, and the simple fact that regulatory processes favor organized, well-funded participants. Does that contradiction bother you? It should, because the same compound de-icing the road outside your house is being flagged as a hazard inside it. Where it's already working, Japan integrated desiccant-based climate management into residential building standards. Germany built passive moisture control into its national housing efficiency framework. South Korea embedded desiccant wall systems into apartment construction codes in major urban centers. None of these countries banned it. All of them measured the results and decided the economics made sense. Picture an apartment block in Osaka, mid-century construction, no mechanical dehumidifiers, desiccant-treated wall panels embedded during a renovation program in the 2010s. Mold incidents in the building dropped to near zero. Resident utility costs fell. There were no service contracts, no replacement cycles, no recurring revenue for anyone. Just a dry building and lower bills. Germany's residential building efficiency standards, among the most rigorous in the developed world, saved the average household an estimated 400 to 900 euros annually when humidity control, insulation, and passive ventilation are addressed together. That's a real number with real consequences for quality of life and financial stress. A family in Miami runs a dehumidifier 8 months out of 12, pays $600 or more annually in electricity for humidity control alone, still reports mold issues. A family in a comparable climate zone in South Korea, living in a building with passive desiccant systems built into the structure, pays near zero for the same outcome. Both families have access to the same underlying technology. One country built it into the standard. The other built a $15 billion industry around not doing so. The technology works on 3 continents with documented results. The economics work. The only thing that doesn't work is the American regulatory and industry environment around it. Why do you think the United States hasn't followed the same path? That answer is worth sitting with. Still here? Good, because most people tap out before the part that actually changes how they think. You've seen the powder work. You've seen the lobbying. You've seen the environmental argument collapse under its own contradiction. What comes next is the layer nobody talks about, the insurance industry, the real estate market, and a federal funding decision that locked this in for a generation. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, hit subscribe right now and the like button while you're there. It genuinely helps this channel keep going and keeps this kind of content free. The insurance industry's hidden role. Here's something the dehumidifier conversation almost never reaches. The insurance industry has no financial model for prevention. None. The entire structure of homeowner insurance is built around billable events. Water damage claims, mold remediation payouts, equipment failure coverage. Prevention doesn't generate a claim. And no claim means no justification for the premium, no data for the actuary, and no revenue event for the insurer. Picture an insurance adjuster reviewing a claim in a Phoenix suburb. A homeowner's mechanical dehumidifier failed during a 2-week vacation. Moisture damage spread through drywall in a finished basement. The claim is $18,000. The adjuster processes it. The insurer pays. Everyone in that transaction has a role, a record, and a revenue event. Now picture the same homeowner who, 2 years earlier, placed $40 worth of desiccant materials throughout that basement as a passive preventive measure. No failure, no vacation damage, no claim. The insurer collected premiums for 2 years and paid nothing out. That outcome is financially ideal, but it generates no data the industry can point to as evidence that prevention works in actuarial terms. The incentive to document, promote, or certify passive prevention simply does not exist inside the insurance business model. More critically, some homeowner insurance policies contain clauses that void or complicate coverage if non-standard moisture management methods are in use at the time of a water damage event. The legal argument is that uncertified methods introduce liability ambiguity. The practical effect is that homeowners who try cheap alternatives risk losing their coverage on expensive ones. That's the trap fully closed. Use the cheap option, lose your safety net on the expensive damage. Stay with the certified system, keep paying, whether it works or not. The mold remediation industry alone generates $14 billion annually in the United States. That number does not go up when prevention works. It goes up when prevention fails, or is never tried. The real estate market connection humidity damage is consistently ranked among the top 3 factors in U.S. residential property devaluation. Real estate disclosure laws in most states require sellers to report known mold or moisture history. That requirement exists because humidity damage is that common, that costly, and that consequential to transaction value. Picture a home sale in Atlanta. 3-bedroom house, well-maintained on the surface. The inspector finds evidence of past moisture intrusion in the crawl space. The buyer's agent immediately requests a price reduction. The negotiation centers on remediation costs. The deal nearly collapses. This scenario plays out thousands of times every week across the country, and every time it does, it generates fees for inspectors, remediation contractors, real estate attorneys, and renegotiation agents. New home builders in the United States operate on thin margin models that prioritize construction speed and material cost minimization. The vapor barrier installed in the average new construction home is the cheapest compliant option available, functional enough to pass inspection, not optimized for long-term moisture prevention. The builder sells the house. The humidity problem develops over 3 to 7 years. By then, the builder's warranty has expired. The homeowner needs a contractor. The contractor recommends a mechanical system. The cycle starts again. Here is the detail that makes this pattern visible in dollar terms. The residential renovation market in the U.S. is worth over $400 billion annually. Moisture and humidity-related renovation work represents a substantial and recurring share of that total. An effective, cheap, preventive solution applied at the construction stage would remove a meaningful portion of that downstream demand. Not all of it, but enough to matter to the economics of an industry that depends on recurring repair cycles. The system isn't conspiring in a single room. It's just structured so that every participant does better when prevention fails. The federal policy blind spot between 2022 and 2026, the federal government allocated $8.8 billion to residential weatherization and energy efficiency assistance programs. These programs are designed to lower household energy costs for low and moderate income Americans. They fund insulation upgrades, window replacements, heating system improvements, and, most relevantly, electric dehumidifier installations and HVAC efficiency upgrades. They do not fund passive desiccant systems, not because the technology was evaluated and rejected, but because no federal performance standard exists for certifying passive desiccant products for residential use. There is no pathway, which means there is no eligibility, which means $8.8 billion in federal spending is categorically unavailable to the cheapest available solution, not through active exclusion but through the passive exclusion of simply never being included. Picture a program administrator in a federal weatherization office. She is not hostile to desiccants. She has probably never thought about them. Her program funds certified products through approved vendor lists. Passive desiccant materials have never gone through the certification process because no one has built that process. Building it requires lobbying the Department of Energy. Lobbying the Department of Energy requires organized industry support. Passive desiccant manufacturers are small, fragmented, and lack the trade association infrastructure to pursue federal standard setting. The HVAC industry has all of that infrastructure and has used it for decades. The European Union introduced a passive desiccant performance standard for residential applications in 2021. Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden moved quickly to integrate it into national building efficiency programs. The United States has no equivalent standard in development as of 2025. The result is a federal spending architecture that systematically funds complexity over simplicity, not because policymakers are corrupt, but because the pathway to inclusion requires institutional capacity that only well-organized industries possess. That is how policy calcifies, not with malice, with inertia. Whether it's a $3 powder, a generic medication, a low-cost building material, or a passive energy system, the pattern repeats with striking consistency. Affordable solutions exist. They work. They've been documented, studied, and in many cases deployed successfully in other countries. The barrier is never just technology. The barrier is the economic architecture built around the expensive alternative. The lobbying, the certification gatekeeping, the insurance frameworks, the federal funding pipelines that only flow towards certified complexity. Systems protect the revenue streams they were built around. That is not cynicism. That is mechanics. And the regulatory and funding decisions being made in the next 10 years will determine what Americans pay for comfort, health, and housing for the next 50. If this video changed how you see the system behind something as simple as a $3 powder, subscribe to World Economics Explained. Every week, we take something that looks small, a product, a price, a policy, and show you the full economic machinery underneath it. Because once you see how these systems work, you can't unsee them, and that knowledge is worth more than any appliance upgrade. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone paying too much for a problem that has a $3 solution. The next video will change how you see something you thought you already understood.